And we're live. Welcome back, you guys. Today we're talking about how to release trauma and live your best life with a good friend of mine, Nate Singer. We'll introduce him a little bit more in a second. Look, everyone knows straight up that trauma is like one of the catchphrase, exciting words of our moment in time, which is actually really positive because it means we're finally talking about it instead of bottling things and culturally starting to address what trauma actually is. I think that a lot of people know conceptually what trauma is. We understand things that like trauma is in your body, but it might not have been caused specifically from something physical. There's that mind-body connection. But I think that the conversation has not matured to the point where we start talking really real about what it means to experience trauma, how it affects you, how you hold it over the long run, and how to actually get rid of it. Out of your body, out of your mind. So that's what we're talking about. And more specifically, we're going to introduce the concept of TRE, which I'm going to wait for Nate to sort of introduce here. This concept and this sort of, let's call it technology of the body. I don't know, Nate will give more details on this. Is something that is super fascinating. And I think everyone needs to know about it. So if this is your first time, welcome to Amplify Your Impact. This is a show for entrepreneurs who are out to change the world with their purpose-driven businesses while increasing their own health and balancing their wealth along the way. But we have a warning for this show, and Nate, I'm throwing Nate totally into the fire here as well. Warning is real life entrepreneurship is raw. So is this show. We record this live. It is unedited and unfiltered. So we say activate your mula bandha and let's go. Obviously, I'm Josh Biro. Today's guest, as I've already alluded to, is a longtime friend of mine. We actually go fishing together all the time. We are fishing buddies. But more importantly, I think we connect on a lot of other entrepreneurial, philosophical approaches, viewpoints, and have some nice brotherly love conversations, I would call it, out fishing about trauma and just what's going on in the world. So I thought it was really important because Nate, as an entrepreneur, has a tremendous amount of life experience that we're going to get into today. So without further ado, Nate, welcome to the show. We're excited to have you here. We always start out with an anchor question and then a random question. The anchor question is really briefly, like, what's your mission in life, entrepreneurship? What's your impact, your ripple effect? What are you out to change and impact in the world?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think, I think I'm actually a pretty small thinker in a lot of ways. So like I feel like I've had a pretty good impact, I would hope, on the world, and but almost always in small individual ways. And so like I've had, let's see, I guess this will be, depending on what you want to classify as a business, the fourth or fifth one that I've started. And most of the time it's kind of just been me. And then I've been presented with an opportunity to, like, do I want to grow this thing and make it big and have a chance to actually, you know, make the big bucks, or do I want to keep it small, keep my work-life balance in a place where I like it? And every time I've been presented with that choice, I've chosen the small one. And so with TRE, it's something that completely changed my life for the better, like in a kind of overnight way. And so I think especially what I'm super passionate about is people who have autoimmune diseases, because they get so mistreated by the medical system in general. And for me, like, I had really bad Lyme disease and typhoid fever at the same time. And so I had just, like, my chronic pain levels were like 9 out of 10 all the time. And TRE just fixed that. Like, I tried lots of other stuff, but TRE worked way better than everything else. And so, you know, I have two brothers who have MS, and I've known a lot of people who have chronic fatigue syndrome, Lyme disease, like all these types of things. And so many of them manifest in the body the same way, which is that your body just gets incredibly tense. The fascia just kind of traps the muscle, like you just get ground up, so you feel like you're kind of walking in a straitjacket. And TRE can really, really help people with that. And so I think that my mission is just to kind of show people some way to like really help them get back to feeling at home in their body. Because so much of like, I was super dissociated for a long time from that stuff, you know?
Holy shit. So we're throwing the random question out the window because we're already into it. I want to hear like the superhero origin story part of it. So back me up to two questions. One, for everyone, because I'm like, people just don't know about it. What is TRE? If you're like, this is what it stands for, this is the quick Reader's Digest version, what is it?
So it's tension and trauma release exercises. And essentially what we're doing is inducing that, like when you see other mammals have a stressful event happen to them, across the board, you'll see them afterwards just kind of shake pretty intensely. Like I remember a time when I was a kid, like 12 or 13, and I had this dog that was awesome. It was half wolf, and hiking through the woods with him. And I was in a creek bed, and he was up on maybe 12 or 15 feet high up on the bank, and just walking along, and the bank just kind of crumbled in a spot, and he fell and landed on his back on a rock. I was like, oh shit, my dog just died. But he was totally fine. He just hopped up, and then he just like shook super intensely for 30 seconds and ran off like nothing else happened, right? And so humans all have the same mechanism that lives inside of us as well. Like it's common to all the mammals. And so TRE is basically just a really simple set of exercises that are pretty similar to yoga postures. And also the guy who created it came from the field of bioenergetics as well. So he kind of mixed those two, and it's just a simple set of exercises that takes maybe 15 minutes or so. And then the client will lay down on the ground with their knees up typically. And then the tremoring response in the body starts. And it's really interesting because it sounds like kind of a bizarro thing, but as soon as people start tremoring, they recognize it as a feeling they've had lots of times before, because it's what our bodies do naturally in a situation of high like nervous system activation. Like, you know, like if you think about it in terms of language, like all of our language around heightened emotional states has it like this trembling with fear, shaking with excitement. Like it's just what your body does when you get activated, right? And it's kind of a way for the body to feel that and then down-regulate the nervous system. But then it looks weird when you just start shaking, and a lot of people associate it, like culturally associate it with weakness, frailty, all those kinds of things. And so kids do this, and then at some point when they start getting more self-conscious, they stop because it's weird looking. And so basically it's a way to re-engage that response in the body. And one thing I love about it that's maybe not ideal from a business perspective, but is ideal from an impact perspective, is that I like a lot of the time you only have to do it 2 or 3 times with a client to get them to understand, to get their body to understand it as a safe thing to do. And then you send them off and they just do it on their own. So you don't have to keep seeing people over and over. And it's, I think one of the reasons that I really, really love it is that it doesn't, you can work on trauma without having to relive in any way the trauma. Like, like when I do it now, like my body's so used to it, I'm usually reading a book or watching a movie or something like that, and my body's just like getting, it sort of feels like house cleaning.
So you're literally just like releasing the tension through the tremoring, shaking in the body, and that's. Yeah. But it's not like talk therapy or something where you're associating it to a specific instance in time or a trauma event or something like that.
Yeah, and people will sometimes have some of those memories will come up as as bodily sensations come up. Like it's obviously going to remind you in some way. A lot of people might cry or have an emotional release of some kind, but oftentimes sometimes people will want to talk about that stuff, but a lot of the time people find a huge relief in having that stuff come up, feel like the impact on their body is diminishing, but they're not having to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right? So for instance, I've done, having, pretty much a lot of my different trauma boxes checked. I lost my train of thought there for a second. I did EMDR, is where I was going, which is, working on a similar level where you're feeling your body sensations around a traumatic event and then working with the body to release it, but you also have to constantly go back into that traumatic event in order to release the emotional and physical impact of it.
Right.
And so a lot of those things are incredibly useful, especially for acute traumatic events. But for like TRE, one reason I love it too is that it works great for people who wouldn't even consider themselves to have serious trauma histories. Like, it just really helps with tension in the body and stress. And I think the kind of the main muscle chain that it works on is the psoas, the iliacus, and the diaphragm. So they're all connected through the hip and the lower abdomen, and those muscles are typically the stiffest in people's bodies. And especially, I think one thing that I've been thinking about this week that's really interesting, because I've been doing pretty intensive physical therapy to try to, undo all the stupid shit I've done through my entire life, is that with, like, I went back home, I'm from Northern California, and watching everybody walk, everybody's hips are so stiff when they walk that they kind of like, they look like there's no ease in their walking in general. And you see that so often now. Like, I feel like, there's 10% of people in the world now that are probably in the best shape human beings have ever been in, because there's so much advancements happening in exercise philosophy and training and all that stuff. But the vast majority of people just spend almost all their time sitting in chairs that are super comfortable, and so they're feeling that that level of comfort right away, but their bodies don't feel comfortable most of the time, because that sitting posture makes your hips lock up. And so everybody has this like super stiff hips now. And so I think that makes it harder to take deep breaths, because your psoas tightens up, your diaphragm tightens up. And I don't know about you, but when I walk around a lot of places, especially in North America, everybody seems like they're in fight or flight.
Especially right now.
Especially right
we
now.
Were just back. We were just back in Canada, and Canada has had a really intense few years. So to your point, you're right. Like, people's general daily calibrated point of level of concern about stuff, it was very high. It was very obviously there. So yeah. Couple of things that you've commented on, I mean, they just totally make sense to me, especially just this musculature that it's working within from a traumatic standpoint. When we root it down, we're talking about chakra level 1, 2, maybe 3, like this base grounding who you are. So to your point of, even if you haven't had some massive traumas in your life, just the general trauma of life, the reason why your body wears down is because life, that's it. So having something to sort of delicately treat that in the ongoing without it having to be such a massive contemplative thing sounds extremely, empowering. The other thing is, I think I may have told you this story, but not that long ago, we were driving back, a bunch of friends of mine and I were driving back from a sort of a Cirque du Soleil presentation thing that we went to. And, it's the middle of the night, and this driver is driving, and I look out the window and I scream to stop the truck, and we get out because some dude had crashed his motorbike on the side of the road in the dark. No one would have been able to see him. He was on a blind corner. He had driven his motorbike into this pit on the side of the road is the best explanation. So he's on the side of the road. We almost hit him. The driver didn't even see him. I'm the one who stopped the car. We get out immediately, do all the stuff, check his vitals, whatever else, call, block traffic, and he gets in the ambulance. So, but then we come home, and for an hour, I couldn't stop shaking. And it's just having that much, I would have called it adrenaline at the time, but regardless of the mechanism, to your point, you're right. That was totally uncontrollable. It was I knew to just allow myself to have the experience of it and not hold back on it. But yeah, that's exactly where my body went. Now that's a very extreme situation, but I think even, someone just pisses you off on the street, that can happen, or you feel really sad, that can happen. So what you're describing makes a lot of sense. Back me up, Nate, because you commented on having your own personal battle with Lyme disease, having your brothers with MS, and a lot of your passionate focus around this is this impact on the individual who is maybe underserved by our current medical system. So I mean, back me up there with Lyme disease and stuff. Like, can you tell us a little bit of that story and how,
Sure,
what
yeah.
I'm curious about is like, if you've gone through this arc of experience of modalities to improve your personal situation to the point that if you, I mean, for those of you, you can see it, for those of you who are watching the video version of this, like, you wouldn't know Nate has Lyme disease. Like, and if you didn't tell me, I'd be like, I don't know, like Nate's an in-shape guy, you know, that's it. So, but now you've arrived at this modality that you find to be so impactful. I feel like you've run the gamut and have this perspective of what's out there and what's possible to treat things like this that are often, to your point, underserved or not, I don't know, but maybe just seemingly untreatable, seemingly out of our control.
Right. So. Yeah. So when I guess I would have been 23, I, grew up in the woods. I was doing hiking like normal, and I got the tick bite and had the bullseye rash. And I was like an invincible person. So I didn't even think twice about it. Like I didn't even get a cold for like 7 years. And so like overnight, my vision went from like 20/20 to 20/80. And I was like, oh, that'll come back to normal. And I, like, my energy levels dropped, but I was still super functional. Like I was still playing hockey and going hiking and doing all this stuff. And I needed more rest, but I didn't really think much about it. And then when I was 24, I went on a honeymoon and went to Jamaica, and apparently got typhoid fever while I was there.
Jesus.
Nice honeymoon gift.
Best honeymoon ever.
Yeah, best honeymoon ever. And so
Michelle's freaking out because she's gonna go on her honeymoon soon. She got married. She's
better not get this.
Like, oh my God. Are you going to Jamaica?
I'm going to European cities, so.
Okay, you should be good.
Yeah.
I'll be
good.
And so at that point, like after getting back, I had my second business at that point, which was making designing fancy aquariums for dentists and doctors and lawyers and stuff in Marin County, where there's all the rich people. And my energy levels just like kind of bottomed out. And I can remember the exact moment where I was like, oh, fuck, there's something seriously wrong. Is I was at a client's house, and it was a pretty physical job. You're carrying water, which is real heavy. And so, I have like 2 40-gallon jugs of water in my hands. And this client lived in this beautiful kind of mansion up the set of stairs. And I looked up the stairs and I was like, I can't make it up those stairs. Like, I'm just not going to make it. And so I put my water back in my truck and I drove off. And that was the last day I had that business, because I just couldn't physically do it. And so I just didn't go to the doctor at first, because I'm an idiot 24, 25-year-old, whatever, and felt invincible still, even though there's plenty of evidence to the contrary. And then, just super, super tired and kind of foggy headed, and laying in bed a whole bunch. And things progressively got worse from there. Like a lot of my cognitive things stopped working, like my short-term memory kind of started to go away. And my body was just super stiff all the time. And then I started developing like some tremors in my hands. And I started going to doctors at this point. So I was like, there's something wrong with me. And they, to a person, were just like, oh, there's nothing wrong with you. You're just depressed. And I'm a pretty happy, active person. And they were like, you just need to go for a run. And I was like, fucker, all I want to do is go for a run. I'm telling you, what you're telling me is actually crazy. Because I would still try and exercise. And when I would like get 3 minutes into a run and then just like completely crash and knock it out of bed for a few days. And as time wore on, everything just kept getting worse and worse. And kind of around the 5-month-ish mark of that is when things started getting really bad. Because I woke up one day and I had a patch of skin about the size of a ruler on my forearm that just felt like it was kind of on fire. And it was super unpleasant. I was like, oh, this sucks. And then every day I would wake up and it would have grown just a tiny bit. And then a good month into that, like my whole body just felt like it was on fire 24/7. And so it became like impossible to sleep. And I started struggling to walk. I would kind of like trip and fall, and I started stuttering a bunch. And like my short-term memory just completely left. I was like laying in bed all day and couldn't read books, because I would get to the bottom of a page and just completely have forgotten everything that I had just read.
Oh my God.
And this was before streaming. So I was just basically like laying on my couch watching food TV during the daytime all day long.
Oh.
So
That's why you're such a good cook.
yeah, definitely didn't hurt. That was like the one thing I could still do. I still have a lot of scars on my hands though, because like cooking, and I still really enjoyed eating. So I was cook, but I had the hand tremor. So I have tons of scars on my hands from all the burns from the oven. Because I would go to put something in, and my hands would hit the side.
Sounds like hell. Jesus.
Yeah, it was not great. Although I still shockingly didn't get very depressed or anything. I like never thought like, oh, I just need to kill myself or get to anything close to there, you know. I was like, well, this sucks, but it is what it is. Like, it is what it is now. So I just better make the most of it. I'm still enjoying being alive, I guess. But I was still seeing doctors, and I still saw some who were like, yeah, you're just depressed. And I was like, guys, like, I couldn't walk up these stairs. I had to take the elevator. That's not depression.
Yeah.
And I was seeing neurologists, and a couple of them were like, well, there's definitely something wrong with you. I just don't know what it is. Sorry. I was like, cool. But then I saw a doctor who was like, you almost certainly have MS. Oh shit. Okay. And I kind of resigned myself to that. So I was going in, getting the MRIs on my head and then on my spine, and they couldn't find any lesions. So I'm probably 35 doctors in, and about a year into this whole process, I saw a doctor who was an infectious disease doctor, and he brought me into his office and sat me across from himself and said, I'm going to do something weird with you. Just go along with it. I was like, yeah, sure. And he said, I want you to clap your hands like this. And so it's just one going up, one going down. And he's like, and I'm going to ask you some questions. And he just started asking me basic math questions. He was like, what's 2 plus 2? And I'm just doing that. What's 4 plus 4? 10 times 12, basic shit. Or can you recite the alphabet backwards? And about 1 minute into doing this, my hand just started going like this. And I was telling it to flip, and it was not flipping. And it was like, I think probably the most existential horror I've ever felt in my entire life. Because I was just like, I can't control what my body is doing right now. And it was so freaky. And he just goes, good, you can stop. And I was like, what the fuck just happened? And he's like, there's something seriously wrong with your brain, and it might take a while, but we're going to figure it out.
Oh.
So I was like, oh, okay, sweet. I'm actually seeing somebody who knows there's something wrong. That's a big step up. Only took a year.
Yeah. At the end, he's like, I think you're depressed. Your hand,
yeah.
You're like,
exactly. And so, yeah, he just had me get tested for everything under the sun, basically. And then, yeah, I came back and said, oh, you have evidence of typhoid fever. I was like, what? And then, we took some Lyme tests, which are always notoriously unreliable. So it would be like 1 negative, then 1 positive, and et cetera, et cetera. But it was easy to put together from like the tick and the rash and what my health did at that point. And so he just gave me a shit ton of antibiotics, which fixed a lot of the acute symptoms. Like my skin no longer felt like it was on fire. My short-term memory came back, but my body was still just a complete wreck. And also at that point, no doctors had told me anything about lifestyle changes whatsoever. And so I was still like eating sandwiches for lunch every day, with like sourdough and cheese and all the delicious things. But it took 2 years before I went and saw a Lyme disease specialist who was super expensive. But he was just like, because I remember asking the doctors afterwards, I was like, do I have to change anything? And they're like, no, you're good. You're fixed. Like, why do I feel like shit all the time then? And so, yeah, like my chronic pain levels were just like, my muscles and fascia were so tight, like you could bounce a quarter off my arm. Like it felt like there was no give at all. Like it would just be concrete, and things they got better as I sort of changed diet and lifestyle and lots of stuff. So it would be kind of intermittently manageable, but it was still 9 out of 10 chronic pain all the time. And so the body's natural reaction and things like that is to just dissociate, right? And so, yeah, like looking at pictures of me is really spooky from that time, because my face looks calm and relaxed, but you can see there's so much tension in my body. Like my hands are held into fists all the time. Like in all these photos, yeah, it's like, it looks like you photoshopped a calm person's head onto a seriously traumatized person's body. You know, and I had a couple, however, for whatever reason, always had quite a few friends who were therapists or psychologists or psychiatrists. And one of them was like, oh, you have a lot of trauma stuff to work through. And I was like, no, I don't, I'm fine. And then when I found TRE I went to an ayahuasca ceremony, not expecting anything of it. Somebody just invited me and I was like, I'll try whatever. Not believing that it would do much of anything. It was just an interesting experiment. And I went to the ceremony, and when I got there, everybody was sat writing in a journal, and the guy leading the ceremony was like, really good idea to set an intention. And at this point, I was, you know, all through my youth, like I grew up in a really atheistic background and a very like, science is the only way, things have to make logical sense, et cetera kind of environment. So I was pretty convinced I understood how the world worked at that point. And I was like, yeah, whatever, set an intention, great. But everybody's like writing out like 3 pages of stuff. And I had my little booklet, and I just wrote like, I'd like to experience less physical pain, because that was obviously a thing that was a serious impediment in my life. And then amongst a bunch of other stuff that happened after I drank the ayahuasca, like maybe 40 minutes in, time gets weird, so who knows, but my body just started shaking. And at first it was kind of like a start, stop, like I was taking, you know, like a rusty pair of kitchen shears out of a garage or something, and it's like kind of going, but not really. And then my body just started, like I was flopping around like a fish that you chuck on the shore, you know, all over the place, like bouncing into the wall. And I can remember like staring at my hands, because it felt like they were shaking faster than anything could go. It was like a blur. And I think my body just shook like this for like literally hours.
Whoa.
And then, yeah, it was cool. And then I just like started seeing, you know, obviously tripping your face off, drink ayahuasca, but I started like, my hands started doing this, and I'm just seeing like this toxic nuclear sludge erupting out of my body, and like out of my mouth and everything. And I like, you know, you're not in a state to evaluate what's happening to you at that point. But eventually, after like 3 or 4 hours, my body just kind of like calmed down, and I was just like, you know, completely tapped out. And then the ceremony ends, and in those ceremonies, you kind of tend to go from out in space to sober, you know, like in the snap of a finger. And I stood up, and I was like, holy shit, my body feels okay. And it was the first time my body had felt okay in like 5 years. And I assumed that it was the ayahuasca that had done that. But like the pain and tension steadily like crept back in over the course of the following month. And then as it was like creeping back up into that 7, 8, 9 range, a friend of mine met the creator of TRE, a doctor named David Berselli, who's like the loveliest guy. And he had just come back from the Middle East and Africa, where he'd been doing like working in war-torn areas and treating people for PTSD, and, you know, dealing with refugees and like very seriously traumatized populations. And he explained to my friends that he was a really well-rounded guy. So he basically would treat people with PTSD in all these different ways, but he was going from little village to little village, and there was all these regional dialects. And he was saying, like, it's just really hard to have any kind of in-depth therapeutic conversation with somebody when the translation is difficult and it's just hard to connect in that way. And so he noticed that when there would be bombings and stuff, because he was in places that were being bombed, that he and all of his friends would shake as soon as the fire or bombing would start. And he was like, what's going on here? He became really curious about it, and he started talking to, you know, fellow researchers like neurologists especially, and they're like, oh yeah, we know what that shaking is. They discovered them in the 70s, and they're called neurogenic tremors, and they come from the brainstem, like the very oldest part of our brain. And he goes, oh, that's really interesting. And so he noticed that people would, like, everybody's reaction to bombings is to curl up into a ball, which evolutionary wise makes total sense, right? Like bomb falls, or you hear some loud noise, you're gonna curl up to protect your vital organs. And he's like, okay, well, that's our initial reaction, and then our bodies start shaking, that perhaps those things are kind of twins, right? Like the one serves one purpose and one serves the other purpose. And it's like, he noticed that after he would shake and not stop himself from shaking, because he's been, trained it, like he was a body worker, he did massage therapy on people as well. So he's doing that. And then the bioenergetic stuff where, I only know a little bit about bioenergetics, but it's kind of a lot, I think, about opening different channels in the body. And so he would just let himself shake, and he would notice, and he would always feel better. And so he just kind of engaged in about a 5-year long, pretty big experiment where he would practice with his friends, and he found that he basically settled on this set of exercises that induced that shaking response with the least amount of effort possible. And then, but he would do it like in a safe environment where there was no stressful event happening. And he found that people immediately reported feeling better, like less anxiety, less stress, way more at home in their body, way more a sense of ease. People would just say, like, basically, I felt more like myself, because in a lot of ways, when that stuff gets, like, I think people who have repeated traumatic stuff happen that they don't address, it feels like being pushed further and further away from yourself. Does that make sense? At least that's been my experience of people. And so that when he would do TRE with people, it would bring them back into their body, which kind of makes sense, because it's in a lot of ways, so much of a lot of these practices, I think, point at the same thing, which is that there's a lot of people that fix themselves through PTSD through mostly yoga too, right?
Yep.
And it feels like there's a lot of different practices that are kind of aimed at sort of forcing your body back into its present moment, as opposed to reacting to past events, more or less.
Yeah, getting back into your body is, that grounding, regardless of how you get there, is insanely empowering in a lot of different ways. And people who have practiced the ability to do that, regardless of modality, I mean, I think that's an athletic, there's a sports therapist I talked to recently, and she was commenting on the same thing, that like half of my job is to get people to be present in their body, in the micro.
Yeah.
In everything, in their training, in the game, and the whatever else. Like, that's a big part of that. So holy cow. So then,
I know that was a lot.
no, that was, I mean, it's so good. So Michelle and I are just quiet. I'm like, I just want to hear what's going on. So basically the synopsis is, everyone go do ayahuasca and start shaking on the ground like a fish out of water. Maybe not. Yeah, it may be. But that, I mean, it's really fascinating to have had some like this experienced, maybe induced by the environment and the ayahuasca, but then to like talk about the universe aligning or whatever else, and then someone else be like, dude, you got to hear about this guy that does this. So then so your friend introduces you to TRE or the concept of it, then, what's that path forward for you where you're like, oh, this makes sense, and then I'm going to pursue this? Because I always find it fascinating, as a little bit of a tangent. The yoga world's a good example of this. I don't even want to go to yoga. Someone drags you to yoga. It has benefits up front. It has secondary benefits you didn't even anticipate to have. And then you like it so much, you're like, I'm going to teach it. I like teaching so much, I'm going to put my entire life on the line and open a fucking yoga studio.
Right.
That's insane. Like that path, but that's the common path. Like that's the story we hear. So
yeah,
we're part of the way through that journey. So that's why I'm kind of curious. Like, okay, let's get introduced. Like, what happens next in terms of going in and pursuing finding this? Yeah,
my friend and I, who had really severe chronic fatigue syndrome after he got presumably Epstein-Barr when we were, it was a high school friend, so when we were 18, 17, something like that. And so he had really like roller coaster health problems as well. And so we hired somebody to come, a practitioner who the creator had recommended, to come and do a few sessions with us. And it was interesting because it was at first, like my body, almost everybody shakes the first time. And so like, 95% of people or so, and I've never seen anybody who didn't shake if they've done it 2 times. And the first time it was super subtle for me, but also like, there's a feeling that most people describe when it starts happening to them, even if it's really, really, really mellow, which is a feeling of kind of emotional release and calming. Tons of people, after they do it the first time, they just start yawning uncontrollably as soon as we're done, and they're like, I need to be asleep now. And so, especially if you do it in the evening. And so I kind of had that first sense, like the first session, it was slow going, but I was like, oh, this feels like it's something. And so we did either 2 or 3 more sessions with her, the woman named Jenica, who's lovely. And as after that 3rd session, I could feel it in my body. It's a feeling of like when you do something and you're just like, oh, this is right. Like when you eat something that it has the exact level of everything in it that your body is craving at that exact moment, when you get it and you're just like, oh yes, this is exactly what I needed. And after each session, my level of tension I felt in my body would drop. And so, yeah, from then on, I would just start. I've basically done it almost every day since then. And that was 11 years ago. It just feels like kind of a non-negotiable part of my day now. And it's really nice because I don't have to do the exercises anymore. Like my body just knows that feeling. So it just happens when I lay down on the ground in a particular position. And so, it's like 15 minutes of my day in which I can still be doing other stuff. So that's one thing I just deeply love about it, and why I think I decided to start teaching it, is because it's something that is really easy to keep going with. Because there's so much of this stuff, I imagine you see this a lot, where there's so many people I know that go to some like transformational retreat, and they're like, oh, this is amazing. If I stick with this, my life will be so much better. And they will for a week, a month, 3 months, but tend to kind of fall off, because they're like, well, shit, if I have to wake up at, like a Joe, I've never been to one, but I have multiple friends who've been to Joe Dispenza retreats, and they'll oftentimes, come back and wake up at 4 a.m. to meditate for an hour every day and be like, oh my God, everything's so much better. But not very often will they be doing that 6 months later.
Right.
Right. And I'm saying, I do that constantly. I like discover some new thing that makes me feel good, and I'm just like, oh yeah, this is part of my life forever. I'm gonna do it every single day when I wake up, no problem. And then 6 months later, I'm like, oh shit, that thing? I haven't done that for 3 months.
Yeah, we often talk about in the yoga world, and I'm not sure, there's a few different places this originates from. My version of it is like the four elements to succeed at anything, right? Is in order: consistency, frequency, accuracy, intensity. But one does not come before the other. So you have to be consistent with something first.
Right.
To that point then, Nate, I mean, is this, this sort of like old school yogis I've been around, and, from India, sort of, you ask them about doing yoga and they often use the analogy of brushing your teeth. Like you do it every day, it's not the same as the gym or something where like you have to have strategic off time for recovery and stuff. Mm-hmm. The way you practice changes. Is this that type of thing? If someone just did it once a week, does it have the same benefit? Like what's the sort of like prescription of it?
Yeah, I think it varies from person to person. I think depending on a few things, like for me, I think it's important to do it every day because I had Lyme disease long enough that it's just kind of in there now. Like if you catch it right away, you can kind of go back to a baseline after that. But if you had it like at the severity and length that I did, your body is always going to kind of gravitationally pull back to the fascia tensing up and the muscles binding up. And so for me, I feel like doing it every day really helps. Well, there's definitely days where I won't do it, and then I will do it the following day. Or even in yoga, a lot of the time, like when we go into Shavasana, a lot of the poses are really similar, and you get like, so if I just do a bent knee forward fold at the end of my yoga practice and then go into Shavasana, my body will shake if I want it to. And so a lot of the time I'm like the weirdo in the corner who's shaking during Shavasana.
So if you see your students doing that as a yoga teacher,
yep, exactly.
Maybe it's on purpose. Yeah.
And so that's a big thing. But I think the way that it works for a lot of people, and I always, when dealing with somebody who hasn't done it before, I tell them not to do it every day at the start. Because a lot of the time what's happened is that you kind of have this backlog of I'm going to use a very technical term, of your nervous system is just kind of junked up, you know, like there's a lot of stuff in there. And I've known several people who, like one in particular who was like, this seems like some nonsense, because it sounds weird, right? And so he just did it on his own, and he did it for a while, like 45 minutes or something, and then just kind of stopped. And he basically had a nervous breakdown for like 2 days, because you have all this stuff that's trapped in there, and then you bring it up, and it's sort of, it's kind of like yin yoga, where, you know, you go to a yin class and the teacher's going to be like, listen, you know, your hips hold a lot of emotions. So if we do these long holds, and you might find that you start, you know, feeling some really intense emotions, that's totally normal. Don't worry about it. And I remember the first time I went to yin, I thought that was crazy talk. And then I was like, but why am I crying during pigeons? What's going on, right?
Yeah. Then you're in the middle of the posture and you're like, you might feel some emotions. No, I don't. Like,
yeah, exactly.
Screw you. Like,
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. And so typically we start out really gentle, like doing the shaking for 10 to 15 minutes in a really manageable level, because you don't want to overwhelm somebody at first. It can be overwhelming for people, especially that are just like kind of coming to a point where they want to start addressing some stuff that's getting in their way in life, or, you know, you just don't want people to get overwhelmed at first, because it's definitely.
So then, here's another question, because I have so many more questions on this TRE part of it, and I want to continue the story as we're going for your, like, where you are now. Teaching is everything too, but this sort of impetus moments of ayahuasca and having this experience and then recognizing it again, because what you were just saying too, right? Like the first time that you did TRE, the impact level was not the same as what you described with ayahuasca, and then it accumulated up, which makes sense to me. So yeah. I guess the question is, and I find this interesting in entrepreneurship as well, do you feel like because of the, like, maybe the ayahuasca wasn't the cause, but because of the experience and being in this altered state, it allowed you to have it? Like that's what started I mean, practically it did, but if you had not had that experience, but were still introduced to TRE, are we at the same place today? That's kind of my question.
I think we are at the same place today, but I suspect there probably would have been a few more years of having to deal with chronic pain in between.
Yeah.
And I feel like I got extraordinarily lucky to have it happen the way that it did. And also, there was an older Mexican guy who was next to me in that ayahuasca ceremony, who basically didn't move a muscle the entire time. He was so still and calm. And there were definitely 5 or 6 points at which I was flopping around so much that I think it could have gotten out of control. And he picked up every time on what was happening, and he didn't say a word to me. He didn't even look at me. He would just stick his hand out and press it down onto me, and my body would kind of relax. And so I think what was happening there is that he was functionally a TRE practitioner, because that's just what my job is when I do sessions with people, is not even to put my hands on them necessarily, but just to let them know that they're in a safe environment and they're being looked after, because it's an extremely vulnerable state, right? And so that's the most important part of my job when I'm doing TRE sessions with people, is to make them feel safe and looked after. And so I think that I lucked out both in terms of it happening while I was in an altered state, but then also having the perfect person next to me the whole time as well. It's funny to be that grateful to somebody who I don't even know the man's name, and will never see him again, presumably, but like of somebody that centered and still to be there to like kind of give my subconscious the signal it's okay to like let all the shit go and somebody's looking after you. They don't get eaten by a lion or whatever. Yeah.
I mean, holy cow, that detail is amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, it's funny how people come into our lives and have that level of impact through simple things. One thing that's said, one action they take, one introduction, whatever. You know, part of the reason I ask is you have a lot of experience in business as well. And as an entrepreneur, I feel like there's some stereotypical entrepreneurial arcs that we go through in building business. And and I don't know, I find more and more now in the entrepreneurial world, there's a larger number of people that have been operating for a long time. They're at this point of difficulty in that arc. But what's happening is they're like waiting for some other thing to happen. They're waiting to be forced to be called to action. They're waiting for something to shake it up. The most recent example would be in the yoga world. I've got videos of us in our group, the Yogapreneur Collective, talking about like, should we start building an online business in like 2017, 18, 19? We're like, yes, like it's so like all the stuff's there, and everyone's like, I don't know, it doesn't seem like it's worth it. Boom, 2020, and everyone is suddenly a professional online yogi, right? So like there was an external force that made that happen. I guess the question I'm trying to formulate that I'd be curious about your opinion on, both as business and through all of this, is that how do you not find yourself in that situation where you're like waiting for this external thing to force you to discover the next thing to go after? How do you just do it? Basically.
It's a good question. I'm not sure I'm qualified to answer because as I'm just sort of going back through my head, and I'm pretty sure that there's been an external reason that's forced me to do it every time I've started a new business.
Fair.
Yeah. So I guess this time I wasn't entirely forced. But I think there was a precipitating event, and there was kind of a trajectory, but there was a very specific precipitating event, which was, wow, this is just gonna make it seem like I'm on hallucinogens all the time, but here we go. I have a good friend whose mom killed herself. It would have been, I guess, about a year ago now, and she just kind of needed to get away, and so she came down here with her brother and her brother's wife, and they wanted to do kind of a ceremony with a woman that both I and my friend know who does mushroom ceremonies, and she's really good at it. And my friend who came down was like, I think I would like to do a mushroom ceremony with her because I think it'll help me to kind of process and release some stuff around my mom's suicide. And so we did that, and we started the ceremony with just my friend's brother's wife and this woman. And the woman asked us like what we want to get out of the ceremony and maybe some background about us as well. And my friend's brother's wife had not, I didn't know much about her background at all. And she'd never done hallucinogens before. And she started talking about, she said, well, the reason I want to try this is that she grew up in Singapore, and her parents were pretty poor. And so they sent her to live with her uncle because he could afford to pay there. And apparently her uncle sexually abused her every day for 6 years. And yeah, real bad, right?
Holy fuck.
Yeah, so intense. And this was, she spent 45 minutes or so telling us the story of this. And I was sat with her, and I found that I can sit with somebody like that and take it, be compassionate and take it on and really empathize, but at the same time still not shy away from it and continue to feel kind of like calm and centered in the face of that, which I don't think is a particularly common skill.
No.
is a thing I've worked at quite a bit. And then we did the mushroom ceremony, and during kind of the peak of the ceremony, me and my friend's brother all read the mom's suicide note, just a fairly intense thing to be doing. And it kind of felt like while I was there, it was one of those moments where I was like, this feels like a purpose, like what is my purpose kind of moment.
Yeah.
Because I felt like I was a good person to be there in that scenario where I can kind of feel loving and compassionate and empathetic, but also hold my ground and feel like a support. And that's essentially what becoming a TRE practitioner, like pretty much what the most important part of it is. And so it just kind of felt like the right moment to start moving in that direction. That was when I started doing a certification course, and yeah, I think that was kind of the flash moment of when I was like, I should probably do this in a more serious way.
Holy shit. I mean, look, I'm reading between the lines and adding my interpretation onto this. Although this is like the flash moment, and holy fuck, what an intense story.
Yeah, it's very intense.
Yeah, I mean, I guess the things that I'm reading between the lines are like, one, like you have no idea what other people's shit is.
No idea.
You know?
Yeah.
So, and I agree with you, Nate, that like the ability to hold space and to be empathetic rather than turned off completely, but also to not take it on so that you don't become part of it. They're the hero in the story sort of thing. Like that is a very unique skill that most people are not grounded enough to do. That's no knock on anyone. It's just like, that's a special thing to be able to do that. So, but, you know, also I feel like, you know, regardless of it, like that moment wasn't the like, I've got to start a TRE business sort of thing. It's more just like realizing who you are a little bit too. So the opportunity for that would not have presented itself if you weren't the person who was going out into the world and doing things, doing your own work, trying ayahuasca, doing, not to say go do psychedelics, that's not a suggestion, or go, it doesn't matter. But the point being like, you're actively participating in the world at large. Therefore, there's the opportunity for something like that to happen, to call you to action. So maybe that's going back to my question. I'm answering it for myself through interpreting your story, that it's like, just fucking do something. Like just start moving, start doing something, start trying something, work on yourself, work on your business, whatever else. And that's really where there's opportunity to present then. Yeah.
And I think that like that initial ayahuasca experience really informed the rest of those other things in that some other stuff that happened during that ceremony. I was just like, oh, I thought I knew how the world worked. I got no fucking clue. Like no clue. And like one of the things that happened with the Lyme disease aftermath that also informed that was I had a bunch of serious concussions from playing ice hockey all growing up. And so the combo of like that and the Lyme disease stuff meant that I had some really serious, like lingering neurological problems. And one of the things that popped up is that anytime I would turn my head past like 90 degrees to either side or close to 90 degrees, I would just get this really intense vertigo, which made it really difficult to drive because I would have to use my mirrors instead of turning my head and, you know, all those sorts of things. And so I went to see this kind of renowned neurologist who works with professional sports teams on concussion stuff in San Diego. And he had his office was next to a Ferrari dealership in La Jolla. So like, you know, he was a real fancy doctor, and he did all these, you know, he did a bunch of tests. He was a really interesting guy. And he was just like, oh yeah, there's part of your brain that's just not working. And I was like, cool. I was like, can you fix it? And he's like, got no idea how to fix it. I was like, that's great. And he's like, you might see this woman though. And he handed me the card of somebody who was a hypnotherapist. And I was like, say what now? And so I went to see her, and I walked in and she met me, and she's like, oh wow, your eyes are like, one eye is dilated like this and the pupil's really small. And she's like, I know this is going to seem weird. And after we did some basic intake stuff, she was like, what I'd like you to do is lay on this massage table. And so I laid on the massage table, and she stuck a Tibetan singing bowl on either side of my head. And then she put me into a state of hypnosis, which took like 3 minutes. I'm super easy to hypnotize. And then,
the guy on stage barking like a chicken.
Exactly. Yeah. And so she played the singing bowls for like 5 minutes or whatever. And she's like, okay, you can get up now. And I got up and I was like, whoa, I feel normal. And I was like, how did you fix that so fast? She was like, you've been there an hour and a half. And I turned my head to both sides and it was gone, completely gone. It's never been back. And so that experience and then the ayahuasca thing, I was just like, I got no clue how the world works. Like I thought I did, I have no idea. And so since then, I basically just say yes to everything, even if it sounds like complete and utter nonsense to me.
That's
yes.
awesome.
Like people are just like, hey, do you want to try this weird thing? And I'm like, yeah, sure, why not? And they're like, do you want me to explain to you? I'm like, no, I don't. I want to come and then I'll just do the thing and I will be open-minded. And a ton of it's worked on me. Like, you know, for somebody who came from a science background and like, I want everything to make logical sense. The fucking hippie magic works way better on me than science does.
Hippie magic.
So, you know, at that point I was just like, I don't know how any of this stuff works, but I'll try everything, you know? And I feel like doing that has made my life a lot better.
I love the approach, and the hippie magic, such a good term. I just can't help but relate it into yoga because that's where I've spent so much of my time. But it's like
a crossover too.
Sure, and you know, the way a lot of yogis would describe it is like, yeah, maybe science doesn't have an explanation for this, but it's because it doesn't have an explanation for it yet. Like it isn't.
Yeah.
The hippie magic stuff is the stuff that hasn't been studied. There's no funding towards it. There's no but to discredit its usefulness or that it works for someone wouldn't be valid either. So we're at a point in history where those things are starting to collide. Okay, so then to become a TRE, what do you call it even? If you leader, teacher?
Practitioner. I'm practitioner? Like, yeah, I'm very kind of, I'm actively trying to avoid, I'm just putting the finishing touches on my website at the moment for this. And I'm doing my little, about page, and it's so funny how much in my own head about it I am, because I'm just like, I feel like so much of these types of businesses and these types of people in the world now are trying to kind of establish a bit of a cult of personality. I don't know if that tracks with your experience, but
yep.
That's a real common thing. And I find that, for me anyway, I really don't vibe with people like that. And so I'm doing everything I can to make sure that I give the impression that I don't think I'm better than people who haven't started doing this stuff or more evolved or any of that stuff. Like, I want to make sure people understand, like, I'm coming into this feeling like we're on the same level. And so, yeah, when you ask what it is, like, probably my preference would be TRE guy, but that's not
the TRE guy. Yeah.
The TRE guy. But just
that's a good website name right there. Yeah.
Yeah.
That fits our marketing rule of memorability. So yeah.
So I guess TRE practitioner is most commonly what people refer to themselves as.
So then what, tell us a little bit about the training, so the other place that I've heard about TRE without hearing directly the term TRE is shaking yoga is like starting to become a thing. But if you probe deeper, they're talking about TRE, but it's like, to me, again, this is a modality and a powerful tool that it's not good or bad. It's like Rolfing is a specific thing. Myofascial release is not official Rolfing, but like, does that mean it's not as good? No. So we're already at a point where I think there's going to be little branches of this where I'm sure someone will run a shaking yoga teacher training soon. But tell us about how you become a TRE practitioner and like, what puts you in a position to be a good facilitator other than your personal experience in terms of the training?
Yeah, it was interesting. So my training group was a really wide variety of people. A lot of about half of them were talk therapists. And I think kind of realizing
oh, that's fascinating.
Yeah, I think what's a big thing that's just kind of been happening in that community, in the psychology community, is just people realizing the limitations of only working with the head, and seeing good results in their patients when they do body stuff, right? And so it was a lot of people who work in mental and physical health who are trying to expand their toolbox.
Yep.
So that was a big part of it. And then, it was basically a lot of practice sessions, combined with a lot of kind of intensive weekend-long modules where we would study theory and talk about potential pitfalls and just kind of like the pillars of what it means. But ultimately, it's a lot less complicated to become a practitioner of TRE than just about anything else that even touches the realm of trauma, if that makes sense. Because for so much of the other things, the body of knowledge that you need to have in order to help people has to be so big and so thorough. Whereas ultimately, I'm there while people are helping, but the nice thing about TRE is it's something they're doing to themselves. It's not I'm not a big deal when it comes to these sessions. It's just basically allowing the other person to feel comfortable enough to have the body's self-healing mechanism. That's what those tremors are doing. It's a really fascinating experience for a lot of people because it kind of feels like they have a bit of a mind of their own. But the way that it seems to work is they can only work on muscle and fascia, basically, right? And so naturally, they're going to go to where you're holding the most tension in your body, because that's the spot that it's trying to release. And so it does almost feel like it's something that's got a mind of its own while you're doing it. And so that's one thing that I say to people all the time is I'm not helping you, you're helping you. I just happen to be here. And so, that's it only took about a year, a little less than a year to be a practitioner. I had a bit of a head start having practiced a bunch, for a decade really regularly, because most people who start the program haven't actually ever done it before. Most people hear about it or read about it because because it's a newer thing. There's tons of research that's going on, and all of the research that they do on it comes out really positively. There's a guy in Denmark who works exclusively with MS patients. And so, Denmark, obviously ahead of the curve on most things. And so that's part of their government sponsor. If you get MS in Denmark, they send you to a TRE provider.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, and so they've done a lot of studies there, and a lot of studies have been done on kind of small groups post-specific acute traumatic event. I was just reading one that came out fairly recently about a group of TRE providers went to Australia to an indigenous community after a bushfire where a bunch of people died and stuff. And so they did TRE for a week with the people who survived the fires. And, a lot of the stuff is self-reported, obviously, but it really fast-tracks people's recovery from events like that, it seems like.
Yeah. It's fascinating to see how something can move through the world, but the sort of stage that it's at in its development within the system is drastically different. That's actually a perfect segue, sort of leading us towards the next thing. I have to comment though, too, just shy of a year of training is not an insignificant amount of effort when it's a singular focus, right? You got to think, even at 4 years at a school, you're doing multiple subjects. When you collectively put them together, it's only 1 year per subject. And right now, I'm going to talk a little bit of smack here in the sort of health and wellness world, but if I can become a HIIT instructor or a yoga teacher right now doing 2 weekend courses for $100 online or whatever.
Right.
Like, it kind of discredits the entirety of the industry, unfortunately.
Yeah.
So that's why I'm asking the question. It's like, not, again, to your point, you know, it's interesting because you're not doing a lot, not as much as maybe, you know, some other modalities out there, yet there's this level of training. I want to get into the business as a vehicle for this line of questioning, but before that, do you have any thoughts on, or I'd just be curious on your opinion, Nate, because there's a lot of commentary and conversation in the entrepreneurial world right now about like trauma-informed marketing and sales, and being trauma-informed around delivering a yoga class, for example, or any sort of modality. And it goes back to this training thing where it's like, if I did a 2 weekend long online training, 200-hour, whatever yoga teacher training, but then I'm going to stand there and say, do these moves that we know energetically affect your body, and then ask questions or tell a story or like talk about trauma and emotion or whatever. There's a lot of people suggesting that there's an ethical clash around this, because you are not prepared to deal with the fallout if you trigger someone in a certain way. Therefore, you should actually stay away from it altogether. TRE is in this category where like you are trying to trigger this, maybe not so directly, to your point. So I don't know, just where do you feel like the balance is there with these types of modalities, and as a practitioner being able to support when someone like might really be going through some shit like a suicide or abuse or whatever else, as we've talked about today?
Yeah, it's a tricky thing. And I'm not convinced that I'm right about this, but I feel like people who have serious trauma problems are getting triggered all day long, every day, right? Like, it's part of being in the world. Like, it's what's going to happen to you. And so I feel like there is this push towards trying to kind of baby-proof the world, if that makes sense.
Yep.
Where it's like, okay, no, it's the job of people talking to not trigger the other person, which I just think is kind of nonsense. Like, for example, when I told the story earlier of seeing that really good doctor and my hand not turning over when I'm telling it to turn it over, for years after that, the thing that someone could say to me, the sentence somebody could say to me that would cause the most intense visceral emotional reaction in me, like out of any words they could say, would be clap your hands, right? And so asking the whole world to not say clap your hands anymore is some bullshit, even though it's the thing that's triggering the hardest. Like, you can't ask people to do that. And if we're expecting to not trigger anybody's trauma response, people's trauma responses are so varied and cover such a wide range that it's just an impossibility, and it makes it so we can't talk anymore. Or like, I feel like it makes it so that it makes it really difficult to have authentic interactions. And so I feel like being trauma informed might be a lot more about the sense that people get around you as a person, whether that's like, oh, this is a person who's compassionate and ultimately safe, right? Safe is maybe the best word. I feel like, okay, this is a safe person to be around. And so, that's what I strive towards, but I don't feel like, I feel like you don't have to have been through a 4-year college course on trauma. Or a cleaner way to put it, I've been around people who've been through 4-year courses on being trauma informed, and are a fucking nightmare to be around if you are a person who's easily triggered. Yeah.
As you were saying that, I was going to I could finish that sentence 100%. People that are like the most informed or whatever else are actually often the last person I would want around myself when I'm talking about my personal traumatic experiences. Like, I don't want to, this is the last person I want to share with. Holy shit. There's so much we could unpack there. Like, I have to say that I share this opinion. It's something that I've personally struggled with in life and in business recently too. And I feel like there is finally some pushback on this, but you're right, like the baby proofing of the world and just, I think taking responsibility for our impact to other people is something that is important, but there's a line somewhere where it's no longer your responsibility. Now there's a lot of opinion on where that line is, but well said, because I suppose if someone's coming in and they're doing TRE, which is, what's TRE stand for again?
Trauma release exercises.
It was the R.
Yeah.
Trauma release exercises, right? Like you came to the trauma release exercise thing. Yeah. So you signed up for it. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, okay. I totally get that. There's a lot there. I've got a friend who runs basically a mental health program for medical students. And, she's been through 10 years of schooling in psychiatry and stuff like that. And, I could tell that she knows me and trusts me and thinks highly of me. So I could tell she was being gentle. But as I was doing this training, she's like, are you sure that you can handle that? Because I think for people that have spent like $500,000 to be educated about trauma, I can see why they would feel like there's this threat coming from people who went through, like my level of training for Heard is just like a drop in the bucket, right? But I also know that this works. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't, there's going to be people who don't resonate with it for whatever reason, and that's fine. But there's a lot of people who it has done absolute wonders for. And I don't think somebody needs to like spend 8 years going to school and studying Sigmund Freud to understand how to support somebody who's trying to work through trauma issues.
Right. Well, I love your definition, and I'm totally going to steal it as well, of like, to be the most trauma informed, it's actually like how you feel to the person who's going through the experience. Because you're right, like sometimes what someone needs is for you to just not do anything at all, actually very often, just to be there, but for it to be safe and for there to not be judgment involved and et cetera, or if they speak up and say, I need help, to be able to react appropriately, but just to hold the space and be there energetically positive, I think is
right. And I think
that's really like an awesome way to think of trauma informed.
Yeah, something I've witnessed a lot of times happening is that when I've been in communities that you could very easily say, oh, this is a trauma informed community, that there's kind of this thing that happens where people all of a sudden, there's this really strong undercurrent of competitiveness around trauma, where people, I think, they're really comparing themselves to each other in terms of like, okay, well, this happened to me, so I deserve this special treatment. And the other person's like, okay, this happened to me and I deserve this special treatment. And it makes it so that it's really hard to just have clean, like it just feels like people are walking on eggshells all the time. And if somebody is walking on eggshells around you, you don't feel safe fundamentally.
Totally.
Right. And how do you how do you establish relationship, right? Yeah.
Exactly. And not shockingly, when I've been in those communities, it's kind of seemed like an emotional dumpster fire for the most part. Because nobody seems calm, because everybody's like really worried that they're going to say something wrong, or that their words might be interpreted wrong, or people are not at ease. And I feel like if somebody's traumatized, they have a much easier experience of being around people who are at ease rather than the other way around.
Yeah. Well said. I love it. I mean, we got to do a whole nother episode just to talk about this element of things. We'll bring in a panel and Nate will definitely be in there as well. Okay. So take me a little bit towards the business side of things, because here's my perspective on it. And it's part of why this show even exists, of Amplify Your Impact, right? It's the idea that we disassociate business, capitalists, making money from a lot of these passion-centric, help the world, high impact things that are out there. Yeah. But in modern times, businesses are the fastest, most impactful vehicle of distribution in many cases. It's not that it's the only way, but it is a very powerful way. And we have created a value system around that. So a lot of the work that I've done too throughout the years, it's really like getting people to look at what they're doing that way, and then to realize that one can't have maximum impact without the other. If you can't actually create positive transformation for people, they're not going to be part of your business. But if your business can't be really strong, you can't make that positive transformation. So it has to be both.
Right.
That precursor aside, take me to where you're at now, because TRE is new enough that, you know, other than the Denmark situation where it's like in the government, how is this formulated into participation? How are people paying for this and doing it? What does it cost? How are you formulating your business? I'm kind of curious about how it's sort of presenting on that front.
Yeah, so I'm lucky in that things have gone pretty well for me. So I don't have to, I'm in a super lucky position with this, kind of in contrast to some of the other people who are in my group who wanted to start a TRE business and are like, I need to have this working well now, where I can construct it in such a way that, like, basically what it is, like, okay, ideally, how would I like this to look? And I can try and do it that way first and see if it works. And if it doesn't, it means I will have given that an honest effort and know where I need to make alterations, or it'll work in the way that I want it to, and my work-life balance will be perfect, and I'll be able to, like, ideally, I would like to be able to donate my time for this stuff as well, because there's a lot of communities that I think it would be really helpful for that are underserved. Like, one of my brothers has some really serious substance abuse issues, and he's been in and out of rehab, you know, more times than I could count. And so I would love to be able to go do workshops at rehab centers for free, for example. And similarly, like, so many people who have Lyme disease aren't able to work and don't really have any disposable income. So, you know, typically in the US anyway, you know, an hour of somebody's time doing something like this is going to cost between $150 and $200, which is out of the realm of possibility for most people that have MS, Lyme disease, chronic fatigue syndrome, that kind of thing, because they're on disability. So they're, like, really on a tight budget. So my initial plan here is to, you know, also I live somewhere where people don't tend to be very wealthy, and I want to be able to, like, not price people out of it, you know? And so essentially what my ideal thing would be is to charge the typical US rate. And because I live somewhere cheaper than in the US, I can still make a living doing it that way, and kind of have the people who are making more money and need it subsidizing the people who can't afford it but do really need it. And thankfully, my middle brother, who has MS, is very philanthropic minded as well, and started a nonprofit teaching people with MS how to sail. It's called Sail MS, quick plug. And I have some access to the MS community that way, because it's something that can really, really help people in that community. So I'm I think there's a possibility that where I end up is basically just teaching this to people who have autoimmune conditions, because it helps so much with them not dissociating from their bodies. And, you know, one of the things that certainly happened to me when you start dissociating from your body is that it's much harder to be open and touch people, and it's harder to have good supportive relationships in your life. And then that kind of enhances the feeling of lack of safety that a lot of people who have trauma stuff deal with, right? And so not only can TRE help with the physical aspect of autoimmune conditions, it can really help with the emotional and social impacts, because so many people end up so isolated because they can't, you know, they don't have the same energy levels, and they just end up kind of stuck at home in bed watching TV all the time. And so I really feel passionately about helping people who are in that situation. And TRE feels like a really good kind of, the amount of impact it can have versus the amount of time and effort that it takes is pretty low. So that's kind of where I'm at now. Although that said, doing workshops at retreats is something that I've done that's been helpful in terms of like, if you give me a group of 20 people and I do a TRE class, there's going to be at least 3 or 4 who are like, ooh, this is the thing. Like, this feels amazing. Like recently I did a workshop, I guess it would have been maybe 3 or 4 months ago. And there was a guy there who seems, it was kind of like a nervous system reset retreat. And so they're going through tons of modalities where they're doing ice bath, meditation, temescal, just like kind of the whole, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks approach. And it seems like almost none of those things worked for him, but he did the TRE and he was like, oh, this is the thing that's for me. And then, wrote me 3 weeks later and was like, I'm going to do a training course. Can you recommend one? And so if you give me 20 people, there's going to be a few people who are like, oh, this is the thing. And then there's some people who are going to be in there and be like really curious. And then there's going to be 4 or 5 people who do it and are like, oh, this isn't for me. And that's totally fine. And so doing some retreat workshops and then eventually corporate workshops, I think would be really good as well. And because there's 2, like the reason initially TRE was just trauma release exercises, and they kind of organizationally decided to change it to tension and trauma release exercises because it works really well for people who have not serious trauma histories, but are just kind of anxious or stressed out in general. And the modern world is so stressful for so many people all the time that just using it as a stress and anxiety reduction technique is really effective. And so I think for going into a corporate environment, that could work really, really well. And the nice thing about it is like, you can talk about TRE in this energetic sense that is going to resonate better with people who are into yoga and meditation and that kind of thing. But also, the guy who came up with it is a scientist, and you can describe in very specific scientific terms what it is your body is doing, right? Like where the tremors are coming from, the specific musculature and what's happening to it, those kinds of things. So I can go into a corporate environment and not use the word energy a single time and explain to people in scientific terms what's happening, and then have them lay down on the ground and shake and feel better, right? So there's—
Okay, wait, now I have to know though. Like what I know we're backing up, but like, give me the science articulation of this. Right. We already talked a little bit about the muscle groups, but like, what is the muscle actually? Is there a description for what is actually happening in the body for this?
They don't know exactly what's happening, like on the pure tremor level, but basically what's happening is that you're getting signals to a part of your brain called a central pattern generator, or central pattern generators, which is like, if you take like an entomologist, right? They can take like a locust, for example, take its brain out and stimulate it with electricity, and the wings still flap. And it's kind of the part of your body that a lot of unconscious motion comes from. So like walking, a lot of those kinds of things. And it seems like what's happening when people do TRE is that the central pattern generator gets activated. And so your body just starts kind of has this involuntary response that you can stop, but it's traveling up and down through the body. And then, as I mentioned earlier, the tremors are generated from the brainstem. It's a very, I mean, it's like one of the things that I have on my to-do list is to kind of boil down into, because you don't want to bore people, but boil down, like make a 1-minute video that's basically just an animated description of what's happening in your body while you're doing TRE. Because it kind of feels like being possessed a little bit, or like there's somebody above you with marionette strings. Because you're like, I think I'm doing this, but I also know I can stop it at any time, which is a very disorienting kind of feeling for a lot of people. I think doing I like the idea of going, like, also not my asshole-ish side, but there's definitely part of me that likes to poke at people's very rigid ideas of what reality is. And so going into an environment like that and having people who don't do yoga or meditation or anything in that world experience what it will be like to have their body do a thing that they're going to be pretty convinced their body won't do is really fascinating. Like, quick aside, there's a Radiolab podcast when I first started listening to podcasts that's about musical language, and it's this quick description of a woman who's a speech researcher, and she has a recording of herself with a patient, and she's walking around her house while she's listening to the recording and just kind of puttering around doing other stuff. And she all of a sudden she's like, oh, that's funny, I don't remember putting music on. And then she goes to her recording and realizes it's hit a loop in the tape. And so it's just playing the same 5 words over and over again. But that at some point her brain switched from interpreting it as speech to interpreting it as song. And so she was like, I got this, like, I have this patient saying these words in my head stuck as a song. And it's really interesting because then the podcast, it's a beautiful piece of audio ingenuity, because what they do is they just leave the recording on for a second, and you've heard it as speech, but at some point, like 45 seconds in, your brain also starts interpreting it as song. And so you hear the words that are being spoken as a song, and then they tell you, they say, and you might think we've switched the recording, but what I want you to do is go back to the start of this podcast and hit play. And you go back and hit play, and the thing that you heard as speech the first time around, you now hear a song 3 minutes later. Which is super fascinating, right? And I have a different brother who has a very, like, that firm grasp on reality. And I did this experiment with him in the car because I was just like trying to poke at that firm vision about what everybody experiencing the same thing at the same time. And I had him pause it during the speech part when I knew he would still be hearing words and I would be hearing a song. And I explained to him, like, we're in the same car listening to the exact same stimulus, and what I'm experiencing is hearing a song, and what you're experiencing is hearing somebody talk. Our experiences of this are very different. And so, yeah, getting kind of being able to speak the language of somebody who feels like they have a firm grasp on what's going on, and maybe giving them a bit of curiosity that maybe they don't, is very appealing to me.
I like the purely like personal reasoning. I mean, that's valid, because I think anyone teaching any modality, there is some internal personal reason that you're also curious about it and interested in it. But yeah, the like shifting of reality, getting someone back into their body to change perspective, because in the story you're telling between you and your brother, like whose interpretation of reality is correct? Who's right about what's happening?
Yeah, neither of us is probably the answer.
Yeah. Who even knows? Yeah. Awesome. So then what you're suggesting, though, is like most people from a business perspective that are going to do TRE, it's not like a class setting. It's like a one-on-one setting is the stereotypical delivery.
Like one-on-one is the most common way for people to do it. But then there's a lot of people who do workshops. Like one of the women who was in my class is a yoga teacher, and she does workshops every weekend at the yoga studio where she teaches. And she does this full now. Like she basically does a TRE class now, and there's lots of return people and then lots of new people. And so, yeah, she just has people come every week. And one nice thing is that it actually feels, once people get over the initial weirdness of the experience, it works really well as a group activity. There's like a real sense of comfort that can happen from everybody in this kind of vulnerable state, doing something that feels good for them while somebody looks after them. There can be a real cohesion. It kind of reminds me actually of the yoga class where you get a bunch of strangers who come in, and it's always interesting to me when you get a teacher who has everybody do an Om at the start of class, because it's typically pretty discordant and not quite right. And then you do the yoga practice together, and everybody sits, and if they do an Om after the yoga practice, it just sounds like if you were to play the two next to each other, one would sound awful and one would sound amazing. Where everybody's kind of getting their nervous system co-regulation happening, and that happens in TRE group sessions as well, typically. So yeah, there's a lot of one-on-one stuff, but then also doing it in group can be really, really good.
And so part of this, though, is I'm just like formulating for like listeners and viewers too. it's like you do this a few times, but then the idea is like a yoga practice. Like once you have a basic understanding of what you're doing, then you really can take it into a personalized practice as well.
Yeah,
and that's sort of part of the benefit.
Yeah.
Nate, what are we missing? What did we not ask you about
that's a good
TRE trauma? Like what? Yeah,
let me think about that one for a second. It does, the marketing aspect of it is really interesting, because I, like, full confession, I hate doing marketing. Like, I really, really, really don't like it. And
I love it. We're friends. We'll make it work. I love it.
Yeah. And so, like, yeah, that's part of it. Like, part of my business goal, just generally speaking, is to see how successful I can start a business and have it be without doing any marketing. It's gone mostly pretty well. And so it is a bit of a tricky thing to, like, a part where I think I get in my own way, and something that I'll probably have to get better at is I really don't like twisting people's arms to do stuff. But I feel like with CRE, it's something that when I describe it to people, almost everybody's going to be like, oh, that sounds really useful and good. But there is that moment where they actually have to book a session, right? And which I think is kind of where the rubber hits the road for so many different businesses. And so I'm still playing with that part with TRE, because it's definitely the most I've cared about any of the businesses that I've started. Which isn't to say that I wasn't putting everything I had into the other one, but this is the one about which I feel the most passionate. And so there's definitely part of me that's like not wanting to twist people's arms. I'm just like, I think it's a really good thing to do, and you should do it. But I've definitely had several people just in the last couple of weeks who I think if I pushed them, they would come and do a session, you know?
Right.
And so I'm still kind of playing with that, because part of the process, and in order for it to work really well, they have to feel completely safe and trust me implicitly. And so doing anything that's even vaguely manipulative is completely off the table for me to do. So there's a real
juxtaposition there.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think that'll be a problem over the long term, because, you know, I don't have Instagram. I'm trying to do a business without Instagram, which is just very obviously stupid.
Well, maybe not. I think Instagram,
you never know. Or
you
like,
just bypass and go straight to TikTok.
Right. Yeah, and I'm not going to do that either. So it's like, and so I think that over the long term, it's not going to be a problem, as like I'm good at my job, so I'm going to get good word of mouth and find ways to get people to have people send clients to me, basically. Right. And so trying to figure out if I can have enough business, because it's not a revolving door business either, right? Like I'm trying to get people in here so that I can teach them what to do for themselves, and then they're gone. And I'm not going to be getting any more money from them, which is on a philosophical level, great. On a business level, not so hot. And so, yeah, trying to find the sweet spot there is kind of where I'm at the moment. And it's nice having a long runway if I need the time to figure that out. But yeah, it's a bit of a tricky spot.
I love that you're bringing this up, you know, and also I'm like, what did we not talk about? And you're like, here's a problem I have. It's so good, so down to earth. So, but what you're describing, I think a lot of passionpreneurs, especially like body workers, high impact, world workers encounter. And it's ourselves included. From a consumer behavior standpoint, there's impulse buy stuff. Mm-hmm. There's the, I really want it, so I'm going to find out how to get it stuff. And then there's the stuff in between that, like, I'm interested, I have a problem that I want to solve. I even believe that this could solve the problem, but from a deeper subconscious thing, I'm really like committing to solving this problem, which is something that's actually scary, even though I wouldn't voice it to myself that way.
Yeah.
So at the moment of the purchase of TRE, yoga, membership, whatever else, that's when the person waffles. We always make the joke, like someone gets their butt off their couch, gets their mat out from under their dog, drives across town, finds a parking spot, shows up for a yoga class on time for when the studio scheduled it. Like that's an insanely large action. And then you get there and they're like, you can do one class for 30 or get a month for 40. And they're like, I just want to try it out. I'll do one class.
Yeah.
Like, what? That doesn't even make any sense. So, but the point being, like, as humans, that's where we're at. So, there's a lot more I can comment on there, but that is an important moment that you've identified, which is, even if I want what you have, even if you can help me, I'll still resist the yes to the purchase. Mm-hmm. So in a non-manipulative way, how do we push that fence sitter over the edge so that they really can get the help from us that we can potentially offer them? And that's hard.
It's a hard one too, especially for me, because I think one of the biggest positive personal changes that I've made, and something I worked really hard at, especially like in my mid 30s, was I kind of had a tendency that I wasn't super aware of, but to kind of parent people, be the person who was like, oh, you know what you should do is this. And I found that my life got a hell of a lot better when I basically worked as hard as I possibly could to completely excise that, like never offering unsolicited advice to people. Just being like, if you want my help, I'm happy to help, but I'm not, under no circumstances am I going to tell you what you ought to be doing.
Right.
And so I think what's happening is there's this like clash between the personal work that I've done and then coming to that point where I'm like, I kind of have to say like, hey, look, this thing like completely radically changed the quality of my life. And I kind of think it might do the same thing to you. And so you should do it,
Man, what a huge entrepreneurial battle that I think so many people listening are going to have experienced and understand, right? Like in the yoga world, we see this all the time too. You're like, this is freaking awesome. Why would you not just do it? Like, why do I need to sell it to you? Basically. Right. Mm-hmm. But the truth is we do. I personally am of the opinion that being good at sales and marketing are intertwined, but they're not exactly the same thing. But sales specifically is the single most powerful skill you can develop as an entrepreneur, because, 80-90% of your problems out there aren't actually a problem if you have the right amount of finance, right? Like, oh, we don't have enough problem to build this website because it's going to cost $5,000. Well, if you're making a bunch of money, that's not a problem anymore, right? That problem immediately dissolves. So sales is how you create that cash flow situation. Yeah. I love what you just said, because I was prepared to interject here a little bit, and I would say it exactly like this. Here's my thought on it from my personal experience, if it's cool with you that I share what you might consider. No, but this little formulative wording, a lot of the sales training that I do with people too, we talk about this sort of stuff, like, don't parents, to use your language, or don't coach someone unless they've asked to be coached. Yeah. But just being able to ask the permission, basically permission-based sales is what we're talking about. Like, is it cool if we talk about this thing for a minute, and like bringing it up that way? Yeah. Because then, people accept it, and at least their automatic barrier hopefully doesn't go up and resist. But the two thoughts that are coming to mind as you were talking about this, and this is a bit of a tangent from our conversation today, but in entrepreneurship, there have been a few sort of typical business models that people have followed for a really long time. Mm-hmm. I think there's a brand new business model, and that is the community model. And it's not that community hasn't existed before, hasn't been an element of business or whatever else, but it's like the business itself wasn't the community. The community was a result of the business. So a yoga studio, ask any yoga studio owner out there, they'd be like, oh, we're part of this community. We were talking about trauma-informed communities, but the community is the result of something else. Right. I think now moving forward, there's opportunity for people to actually look at it in the reverse way. What I'm going to build is a community, and the result will be a business can sprout off of it. And a lot of what we do is actually angled a little bit that direction as well. The point would be, from the purchasing standpoint, where this ties together is, regardless if you find the community model or not, that moment of decision, if we can continue to sell someone at that moment the proof on the other side. It's like, how do you reassure someone all the way through to the conclusion of being in? And then even after they're in, continue to reassure them that their decision was correct. So where this plays out right now, simplistically, is like on a sales landing page, right beside the button that says "do it, book now" sort of thing, there's a testimonial, and like right beyond the like, here's what you're going to get features list, or here's what we're going to do. So it sort of highlights what's going to happen. Right below it is screenshot from the private Facebook group or whatever, right? So it's like, we're continuing that isn't sales stuff anymore. That's reassuring people they're in the right place. And it goes all the way through that whole funnel.
Yeah. As you're saying that, I think it makes a ton of sense with kind of what my ideal vision of this would be, which is, if you have a bunch of people who have autoimmune conditions, you can create a community of people around like doing TRE and that. And that's a lot of those people are so isolated as well that they, like the MS forums that exist on the internet right now are mostly, it's weird to go on the internet where you're like, oh, this is a really good place to be. Like, people are being supportive with each other and sweet to each other. They're not screaming and calling each other names, that kind of thing. That if I were to build like a private Facebook group for something like this, that it could be really effective, because it'd be like, look, it's part, here's all of these people that are being active in this because it's been helpful to them. And, that's part of what you get is kind of access to this community of people who have gone through the same thing. Because I think it's really, a lot of the time, hard for people who have, say, MS to create friendships with people who don't, and also feel understood, where they're just like, yo, I know I said I was going to come to this thing later, but I just feel terrible, so I can't.
Right.
It's difficult to have that. So having the community aspect of that was not something I thought of, but could be really, really good.
Yeah. And I think to that point too, there's different ways to formulate the business model around it too, but it could be as simple as like, you can actually come into the community to
totally,
behind the scenes and like have the conversation, and the normal organic conversation is about how this positively impacts things. So then making the purchase is no longer scary. You're like, okay.
So it would be like, access to anybody who wants to join, basically. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And then they can see lots of people who will be like, I did feel like this, and now I feel like this, and it's a big reason why.
Right. And without you making a testimonial and force feeding it in front of me, it's like, it's just there already. I always think about like, why is it that Amazon is so good? This is my stupid business brain goes like, there's the reasons why it's bad, but like, why is it good? But you could use the same for a lot of bigger companies. Like, why is Home Depot awesome? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you can tell I'm a dad because I'm like, Home Depot.
I know, right?
But like,
when I go in there, like, I'm gonna fix
right. But it's like, in either of these places, access is easy. It has enough of the specific thing that it's supposed to have. Amazon is everything, right? Like, if you're looking for something, you can find it there.
Yeah.
And then also, there's no reason to object to it because all of the other friction points have been eliminated, including you're like, I ordered the wrong thing. You just fucking send it back. You don't have to talk to someone. There's no, like, ordering it is one button. It shows up at your house tomorrow. You're like, I don't like it. Send it back.
Yeah.
And that's it. The whole thing's over. So then you become a repeat client, as a result of that. This is a simplistic way of saying it, but I think to your point around this friction point in this moment of sales too, that's the thought process to go through, maybe, is like, rather than manipulating and convincing using bro marketing, that's my new favorite catch term out there. I see it everywhere. Rather than going that direction, it's how do you just eliminate the objections so thoroughly that there's no reason, like, you can't say no because there's no reason to say no. There's no reason to click and complete the sale, basically.
Except ethical reasons with Amazon specifically, and Home Depot.
Right.
They just don't pay their
Michelle's like,
employees.
well, they haven't solved that reason yet. They
They have
haven't
not solved that reason.
reason.
But their sales are that good that I'm still buying off Amazon, even though I know they are shit people.
I know it's such a hard. You know, their business model is good when everybody agrees they're evil and everybody orders from them
And
all the
still
time.
orders.
And everyone orders anyways.
I think about
it's
this
true though.
all
It's
the
true.
time.
It's so true. Yeah. And if there was like the ethical Amazon competitor where everything was 30% more and it got there a week slower, but their employees are paid really well,
no chance.
Not going to compete. It's like there is some balance point there.
No chance.
You know what's going to happen is Amazon's going to start adding in. I'm making fun of this because I was back in Canada and we were in Whistler for a while, and everything in Whistler is expensive. Plus. Everything, it doesn't matter where, there's a tip option. Like you're like, you go to the bakery and you buy a muffin where it's like, you pick out the muffin, you put it up on the counter, and then there's like a tip option. You go to the grocery store, tip option. Like in the most weirdest places, there's tip options, and half of them start at 20% and go up to like 28 now. Yeah, I'm like, dude, they start at 20? I'm like, I'm going to pay a fifth of this bill as a tip in here. Like, anyways, I digress. That detail aside, that's what Amazon will do next.
Yeah,
you'll be checking out and they'll be like, do you want to add a tip for our employees?
Yeah, so that we can pay our employees.
Dude,
don't pass it to the end user.
No, oh my God. Part of COVID, they did that when they were like, they did it with all their employees where they were like, look, we're not giving people extra sick time for COVID, but employees can donate their sick time to other employees who have COVID.
Right.
But like,
you're like,
yeah, they were like,
Michelle's head's gonna explode.
Michelle's face.
In case you're listening to this, Michelle's head just exploded.
I want to scream. These people are so evil.
I know. I was like, yeah, but I was like, whoa! It's like you're making billions of dollars and you're telling your $8 an hour employees it's their job to give to make
real
sure they're
fucking cool, Jeff.
Yeah. Meanwhile, you're flying yourself in a huge phallic object up into space. Like, come on. Oh my God. Actually, this is a perfect conclusion anyways, to sort of wrap up here, because this goes back to like, these are these little like mental micro stressors that clearly they're not trauma, right? But like, these are the accumulative life things that you're going to worrying about Jeff Bezos flying his big dick rocket around.
I gotta shake off Jeff Bezos real fast.
Yeah, Michelle's like, I need to go shake off some Bezos.
Shake off.
Oh my God.
Do a workshop.
Can we please immediately following this try to email Jeff Bezos and invite him on the show? Like, I just feel like now we have to have this conversation.
If that happened, I would just scream at him the entire time and it would not be good.
Yeah.
We'd have to have a special episode. Sans Michelle. Yeah.
I'll sneak on and just like go crazy. I'll throw a protest.
Oh my gosh. All right. Well, yeah, the little tiny things that accumulate, and just realizing that you don't have to anything, but just there's opportunity for you to release this from your nervous system, from your body, therefore also your mental self, so that you can be you can be we said live your best life, sure, but also like just be yourself. I think that's such an underrated, a simplistic way to describe an underrated situation. You just really feel like you can authentically be yourself. I mean, the
creator of it, whose name is David Berceli, and he's actually put a ton of stuff on YouTube. So a lot of his talks, and he has a YouTube channel that's great. And he's he's one of those people who you listen to him talk and you're just like, oh, I would do anything for that guy. Like I would run through a wall for that guy. And one of the huge things that he talks about, and what makes him so passionate about TRE, is that the positive social benefits that come from people all of a sudden feeling at home in their own body again. Because I think that a huge thing that's happening in the world now that people don't really talk about is everybody feels like the world is less safe now than it actually is. Which doesn't mean the world is safe, but our perception of the danger is so elevated because we just see everything bad that happens everywhere now.
Yeah.
Right. And so like that's never happened before in human history. This is new. Like we are not built to know every bad thing that happens to every bad person everywhere. You know, like somebody got axe murdered in Texas. You weren't gonna you didn't know about it. And now you hear all that stuff, and it gives everybody the impression that the world is more dangerous than it is. And when you feel safe in your body, then that sense of safety extends, and then socially it makes it so much easier to connect, which makes you feel even more safe. And so it's kind of a way of like going from a place of being antagonistic with the world to feeling a sense of ease and comfort in the world, which just makes the world a better place for everybody.
My head just exploded. Yeah. Yeah, right. Yes. We have to. If your body's your temple, then you have to be safe in your own temple.
Yeah, exactly.
Simple as that. I mean, yeah. Holy shit. Nate, I don't even know. I mean, we could go for 5 more hours and start talking about.
I have no clue.
We did not even address like fishing, or any of the other fun stuff that we do. But that's a whole nother episode. If people want to get in contact with you, they're like, okay, I want to try this out. Let's do a Zoom session, or I just want to talk to you about this or whatever else, both as an entrepreneur and or for their own personal needs. Where should they go? How do they get in touch with you? What are they?
Yeah, at the moment, my website should be up by the end of this week, which is trewithnate.com, nice and easy. And then the email is trewithnate@gmail.com. So I'm on there every day, so I'm happy to respond there. And maybe don't want to give my phone number out on for a podcast, but
yeah. But I'll give your phone number out. It's okay.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah,
trewithnate.com.
Yeah,
I love it.
Yeah,
okay, thanks you guys. Nate, thanks for coming. This was like super fascinating conversation. Obviously, we jumped all over the place. We'll have you back on the show again, I'm sure, talking about maybe your experience again building the business in a year, and then talking about some of these other tangents that we go. I think it'd be interesting to see. You guys, if you haven't hit subscribe yet, or, either on YouTube, if you're watching this, or on the podcast channel that you're listening to this, make sure you do, because obviously with Amplify Your Impact, we're going to bring in interesting characters, have these in-depth conversations. And here's the call to action for you guys. What should we talk about next? What's the subject matter that you're like, I want to go deeper on this. I want to talk about entrepreneurship plus XYZ. That's what we want to hear for you guys. Send us an email, josh@nomadbusinesscoaching.com. Tell us what you think. We'd love to hear from you guys. Or, of course, you can comment if you're watching this on YouTube. Other than that, we'll see you guys next time. That's it for the show today. And go and keep making positive impact on the world. I'll talk to you guys soon. Peace.